My lawyer told me to keep my mouth shut, but when you've got blood on your hands and a man's life on your conscience, silence feels like a noose tightening around your soul. I'm not a killer, but the HOA made me one that night. It all started with the damn flowers. Karen flowers, they called them, those gaudy, overbred blooms that every suburbanite in our county seemed to worship. Out here on my 40-acre ranch, where the Wyoming wind howls like a scorned lover, I didn't give a rat's ass about their floral obsessions. My land was for cattle, family, and freedom, not some cookie-cutter neighborhood aesthetic. But the Pine Valley Homeowners Association didn't see it that way. They'd been hounding me for years, ever since they annexed the land around my ranch, claiming my unkempt property was dragging down their precious community image. Unkempt. My fences were sturdy, my livestock healthy, and my wife, Sarah, kept our garden blooming with wildflowers that could outshine their manicured lawns any day. But the HOA didn't care about beauty, they cared about control. The trouble began in spring, when their president, Greg Thornton, sent me a letter demanding I plant Karen flowers along my property line to enhance curb appeal. Curb appeal? My nearest neighbor was a half-mile away, and the only curb was the dirt road I'd carved myself. I tore up the letter and burned it in the fire pit, thinking that was the end of it. I was wrong. Greg showed up a week later, striding onto my land like he owned it, his polished loafers kicking up dust. He was a wiry man, all sharp angles and sharper words, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "you're making life difficult for everyone. Plant the flowers, or we'll escalate." I told him to get off my property before I escalated him into next week. He left, but not before spitting on my gaiety, a petty act that felt like a declaration of war. Sarah tried to calm me down that night. "They're just bullies, Tom," she said, her green eyes soft but worried. "They'll move on." Our kids, Ellie and Ben, were playing by the hearth, oblivious to the storm brewing. I wanted to believe her, but I'd seen men like Greg before, small men with big egos, who'd rather burn the world down than lose a fight. The HOA's next move was a fine $500 for non-compliance. I laughed it off and tossed the notice in the trash. Then came the liens, slapped on my property like a chokehold. They claimed my refusal to plant their flowers was a violation of some bylaw they'd written in their gated community fantasyland. I hired a lawyer, a grizzled old-timer named Hank, who told me the HOA had no legal standing on my ranch, which predated their subdivision by decades. "They're bluffing," Hank said. "But watch your back. These types don't quit." He was right. They didn't quit. They started showing up at night, Greg and his cronies, shining flashlights into our windows, leaving threatening notes nailed to my barn. "Comply or lose everything," one read. Ellie, only 8, started having nightmares about the bad men. Ben, 10 and stubborn as me, wanted to fight them with his BB gun. I told him to stay out of it, but I could feel my own blood boiling. This was my land, my family. I'd fought off coyotes and rustlers before, I wasn't about to let a bunch of pencil pushers scare me. Then came the day that changed everything. It was late June, the air thick with the scent of sagebrush and impending rain. I was fixing a fence near the north pasture when Sarah's scream tore through the silence. I dropped my tools and ran, my heart pounding like a war drum. When I reached the house, I saw them, Greg and 3 other HOA goons, standing on my porch. Sarah was shielding the kids behind her, her face pale but fierce. Greg held a clipboard, but one of his men, a hulking guy named Vince, was waving a crowbar like it was a scepter. "You've had your chance, Callahan," Greg sneered. "We're here to enforce the rules. Step aside, or we'll make this personal." "Personal?" I roared, stepping between them and my family. "You're on my land, threatening my wife and kids. You don't get to make this personal, I do." Vince laughed, a low, ugly sound. "Big talk for a guy who's about to lose everything. We'll tear this dump down if we have to." He took a step toward Sarah, raising the crowbar. That's when I saw red. I didn't think I acted. My rifle was leaning against the porch rail, always loaded for predators. I grabbed it, racked around, and aimed it at Vince's chest. "Back off," I said, my voice steady but burning. "Or I'll drop you where you stand." Greg's smile faltered, but he didn't back down. "You wouldn't dare," he said. "You're not a killer, Tom. You're just a stubborn old fool who doesn't know when he's beat." He was wrong. I wasn't a killer, not yet. But I was a man who'd do anything to protect his family. The air crackled with tension, the kids whimpering behind Sarah, her eyes locked on mine, pleading for me to stay calm. But calm wasn't an option anymore. Vince took another step, his crowbar gleaming in the fading light. "You gonna shoot me, cowboy?" he taunted. "Go ahead. Try it." I didn't want to pull the trigger. God help me, I didn't. But when Vince lunged toward Sarah, I had no choice. The shot rang out, sharp and final, echoing across the ranch like a thunderclap. Vince crumpled to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Greg and the others froze, their bravado shattered. Sarah screamed, pulling the kids inside. I stood there, rifle still in my hands, my heart hammering so hard I thought it'd burst. "Get out," I said to Greg, my voice barely above a whisper. "And don't come back." They ran, leaving Vince's body in the dust. I dropped to my knees, the rifle slipping from my hands. Sarah came out, her face streaked with tears, and wrapped her arms around me. "You had to," she whispered. "You had to." But had I? That question haunted me as the sheriff arrived, lights flashing in the dusk. I told him everything about the HOA's harassment, the threats, the crowbar. He took my statement, his face unreadable. "Self-defense is one thing, Tom," he said. "But this is messy. Real messy." The days that followed were a blur. Vince was alive barely. The bullet had hit his shoulder, not his heart, but he was in a coma, and the doctors weren't optimistic. The HOA spun the story, painting me as a crazed gunman who'd attacked an innocent man over a minor landscaping dispute. The local news ate it up, and soon my name was synonymous with unhinged rancher. Hank fought hard, digging up dirt on the HOA's illegal tactics, but public opinion was against me. The community rallied around Greg, calling him a victim of my lawless ways. Sarah tried to keep things normal for the kids, but I could see the toll it took on her. Ellie stopped talking, her eyes always searching for danger. Ben started sneaking out to check the fences, like he was guarding the ranch in my place. I wanted to tell them it'd be okay, but I didn't know if it would. The trial was looming, and Hank warned me that a jury might not see me as the protector I'd been that day. "They see a gun, they see a villain," he said. "Doesn't matter that you were saving your family." The HOA didn't let up, either. They sent more letters, demanding I pay for Vince's medical bills, threatening to seize my land if I didn't comply. Greg even had the gall to show up at the courthouse during my arraignment, smirking like he'd already won. I wanted to wipe that look off his face, but Sarah's hand on my arm kept me grounded. One night, as I sat on the porch with my grandfather's old revolver in my lap, Sarah found me. "You're not giving up, Tom," she said, her voice fierce. "We've fought too hard for this place, for our kids. You did what you had to, and we'll keep fighting." Her words lit a fire in me, but it was a flickering one. The truth was, I was tired of the threats, the legal battles, the weight of what I'd done. I'd protected my family, but at what cost? The ranch, once my sanctuary, felt like a prison. And deep down, I knew the worst was yet to come. The weeks before the trial were a slow descent into hell. The HOA's campaign against me intensified, their letters now laced with veiled threats about justice for Vince. They'd hired a slick PR firm, and soon, every news outlet in the county was running stories about the violent rancher who'd gunned down a community leader. They conveniently left out the part where Vince had waved a crowbar at my wife and kids. My lawyer, Hank, was a bulldog, digging up evidence of the HOA's strong-arm tactics, bribes to local officials, forged documents claiming my land was under their jurisdiction, but the court of public opinion didn't care about facts. They wanted a villain, and I fit the bill. Sarah kept the kids close, homeschooling them to shield them from the whispers at school. Ellie's nightmares got worse. She'd wake up screaming about the man with the stick. Ben, on the other hand, turned inward, his usual spark replaced by a quiet anger that scared me more than I let on. I caught him one night carving his initials into the barn door, his small hands gripping the knife like it was a lifeline. "I'm ready if they come back, Dad," he said, his voice steady but too old for a 10-year-old. I didn't know how to tell him that this wasn't his fight. The trial began on a gray October morning, the courtroom packed with HOA supporters in their pressed khakis and Karen flower pins. Greg sat in the front row, his face a mask of righteous indignation. I felt like a caged animal, my flannel shirt and work boots out of place among the suits and polished shoes. Hank had warned me to keep my temper in check, but when the prosecutor called me a loose cannon with a vendetta, I nearly lunged out of my seat. Sarah's hand on mine was the only thing that kept me grounded. The prosecution's case hinged on painting me as reckless, a man who'd escalated a minor dispute into violence. They trotted out witnesses, HOA members who swore I'd been hostile for years, refusing to integrate with the community. One woman, a pinched-faced busybody named Linda, claimed I'd threatened her with a shotgun when she'd asked me to mow my grass. A lie, but the jury ate it up, their faces hardening with every word. Hank countered with evidence of the HOA's harassment, photos of their notes nailed to my barn, records of their illegal liens, but I could see the doubt in the jurors' eyes. To them, I wasn't a man defending his family, I was a relic of a lawless past, standing in the way of progress. Then came the day Sarah took the stand. She walked to the witness box with her head high, her voice steady as she recounted the night of the shooting. "Vince was going to hurt us," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "Tom did what any husband, any father, would do." The prosecutor tried to twist her words, suggesting she'd exaggerated the threat to protect me, but Sarah didn't waver. "I know what I saw," she said. "That man raised a crowbar at me and my children. Tom saved our lives." Her testimony was a lifeline, but it wasn't enough. The turning point came when Greg testified. He took the stand with a practiced air of sorrow, spinning a tale about how he'd only wanted to resolve a misunderstanding. He claimed Vince had been unarmed, that I'd shot him in cold blood over a friendly discussion about flowers. The lie was so blatant it took my breath away, but the jury leaned forward, hanging on his every word. Hank tore into him on cross-examination, exposing inconsistencies, Greg's own emails threatening to ruin me, security footage showing his cronies trespassing, but I could tell the damage was done. Greg was one of them, a man who spoke their language of rules and order. I was the outsider. The night before the verdict, I sat on the porch with Sarah, the stars hidden by clouds. "What if they lock me up?" I asked, my voice breaking for the first time in months. She took my hand, her fingers warm against my calluses. "Then we fight from the outside," she said. "This ranch, this family, it's worth it." But as I looked at her, I saw the toll this had taken, the lines etched deeper around her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped when she thought I wasn't watching. I protected them that night, but at what cost? The jury came back faster than I expected. Guilty. The word hit like a sledgehammer. Manslaughter, they called it, with a sentence of 7 years. Sarah gasped, gripping my arm as the courtroom buzzed. Hank promised an appeal, but I barely heard him. All I could see were my kids' faces, Ellie's wide, terrified eyes, Ben's clenched jaw as the bailiff led me away. I'd saved them from Vince, but I couldn't save them from this. Prison was a different kind of hell. The walls closed in, the air thick with despair. I kept to myself, avoiding the gangs and the fights, but the isolation was worse than any beating. I thought of my family every day, their faces the only thing keeping me sane. Sarah wrote me letters, filled with stories about the kids and the ranch, but I could read the strain between the lines. The HOA was still circling, trying to seize the land now that I was gone. Hank was fighting them, but the legal fees were bleeding us dry. 2 years in, I got a letter that broke me. Sarah had found a buyer for the ranch. "It's the only way to keep the kids safe," she wrote. "They're threatening to take everything, Tom. I can't do this alone." I stared at the words until they blurred, my hands shaking. The ranch was more than land, it was my father's legacy, my children's future. I'd fought to protect it, and now it was slipping away. I wanted to scream, to tear down the walls, but all I could do was clutch the letter and pray. When I was released on parole after 4 years, the world felt foreign. Sarah picked me up in our old truck, her hair streaked with gray, her smile weary but real. The kids were taller, quieter, their childhood stolen by the years I'd missed. We drove to a small apartment in Towno Ranch, no wide open spaces, just a concrete box that felt like another prison. Sarah explained how the HOA had won, forcing the sale to pay off their liens. "They planted those damn flowers everywhere," she said, her voice bitter. "It's like they erased us." I tried to rebuild, to be the husband and father they needed, but the weight of what I'd lost was crushing. Ben was angry, skipping school and picking fights. Ellie clung to me, afraid I'd disappear again. Sarah worked double shifts at the diner, her hands raw from scrubbing dishes. I took a job at a feed store, hauling bags of grain for men who looked at me like I was a criminal. Maybe I was. One day, I drove past the ranch. It was unrecognizable, fenced off, dotted with cookie-cutter houses and rows of Karen flowers. I stopped at the gate, my chest tight. A man in a polo shirt approached, eyeing me like I was trespassing. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone clipped. I recognized him, one of Greg's cronies. I wanted to tell him this was my land, my blood and sweat in every inch of it, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I turned and walked away. That night, I found Sarah crying in the kitchen, a letter from the HOA in her hand. They were suing us again, claiming we owed back fees from before the sale. It was a final twist of the knife, a reminder that they'd never let us go. I held her, promising we'd fight, but the fire in me was gone. I'd shot a man to protect my family, but I couldn't protect them from this. In the end, we moved away, leaving Wyoming for a small town in Montana where no one knew our story. We rented a modest house, started over with nothing but each other. The kids slowly healed. Ben found solace in mechanics, Ellie in painting, but the scars remained. Sarah and I grew closer, our love tempered by loss, but I never forgave myself. I'd done what I thought was right, but the cost was everything I'd fought for. The HOA won, not because they were right, but because they had power, money, connections, and a system that favored their rules over my freedom. I think about Vince sometimes, wondering if he ever woke up, if he felt the weight of what he'd done. But mostly, I think about my ranch, my home, now buried under their flowers. They took my land, my name, my peace. And that's the bitterest truth of all, sometimes, protecting what you love means losing it anyway.